Our story starts with Jiyeon, an aspiring drummer trying to make ends meet while searching for her big break. She picks up a part-time gig as a driver to pay the bills. Little did she know her first day on the job would take a dramatic turn. Imagine this: Jiyeon's passenger, a woman who turns out to be a pianist from the prestigious Jiyeon conservatory, suddenly opens the car door and jumps into a river. Turns out, she was recently fired by the conservatory's new conductor, Jiyeon, and in her despair, she decided to end her life. Even though Jiyeon can't swim, she doesn't hesitate. She dives in after the woman, risking her own life. The next thing she knew, she woke up safe and sound, and the woman was being rushed to the hospital. Talk about a close call. Soaking wet and shaken, Jiyeon heads home, only to be caught in a downpour. She ducks into a convenience store to buy an umbrella and a few snacks, but when she goes to pay, she realizes she's short on cash after paying the deposit for her driving job. Reluctantly, she leaves the umbrella behind and prepares to brave the rain. Just then, a mysterious stranger appears and offers her his umbrella. He walks off into the downpour, leaving Jiyeon stunned. She chases after him to return the umbrella, not wanting to be indebted to a stranger. But as she's catching up, a car comes speeding towards her. The stranger pushes her out of the way, saving her life. Suddenly, Jiyeon is overwhelmed by a disturbing vision. Flashes of blood and something terrifying. She collapses, unconscious. When she wakes up, she's in a hospital bed, trying to piece together what happened. After being discharged, Jiyeon heads to her music lessons. Then her phone rings. It's her best friend, Jiyeon, with some incredible news. The Jiyeon Conservatory, where the pianist she rescued worked, is looking for a drummer. Jiyeon urges Jiyeon to audition. Without a second thought, Jiyeon ditches her lesson and hops on a motorcycle taxi to the conservatory. With Jiyeon's help, she makes it to the waiting room. Seeing a picture of Jiyeon, the conductor who indirectly caused the suicide attempt, strengthens Jiyeon's resolve. This is her chance. Finally, it's Jiyeon's turn to audition. She takes a deep breath, picturing Jiyeon, another famous drummer, Jiyeon, guiding her. As she begins to play, her drumming is so captivating that it draws the attention of Jiyeon, who is listening from behind a curtain. Just as she's about to finish, one of her drumsticks slips from her hand and flies into the air. As she reaches for it, she accidentally trips over the curtain, falling and hitting her nose, landing right in front of Jiyeon, bleeding and embarrassed. So after her epic fall in front of the conductor, Jiyeon, he actually recognizes her. And what does he do? He laughs, right in her face. Talk about embarrassing. Mortified, Jiyeon rushes to the bathroom to fix her bloody nose. Her friend Jiyeon texts, eager to know how the audition went, but Jiyeon can only say she'll tell her tomorrow. Defeated, Jiyeon goes home, hoping to sleep off the disastrous day. But even though she's exhausted, sleep won't come. She texts her boyfriend Jiyeon, just wanting to hear his voice, but he doesn't reply. Frustrated and restless, she heads down to the convenience store for some comforting instant ramen. As she's preparing her noodles, she hears a familiar voice. She turns around and, wouldn't you know it, it's the mysterious stranger who saved her from the speeding car. He asks her to buy him some kimchi and fried rice as a thank you for saving his life. Or rather, for him saving hers. Jiyeon thinks he's a bit odd, but she doesn't want to owe anyone anything. So she buys him the food and moves to another table to eat her ramen in peace. But the stranger isn't having it. He follows her and sits right across from her. She tries to signal for him to back off, but he's completely unfazed. He just sits there, staring. Creeped out, Jiyeon moves again. And guess what? He follows her again. This time, he writes his phone number on a bill and hands it to her. Confused, Jiyeon asks him what he's doing. He explains that he's looking for work. He can run errands for people and, get this, offer late-night chats for insomniacs. Jiyeon raises an eyebrow at the word, insomniacs. And the stranger, sensing her disbelief, tells her to believe it or not, then goes back to his food. Okay, officially weird. The next day, Jiyeon's back to her driving gig. And, you guessed it, another bizarre passenger. This time, the guy strips naked in her car. She's completely freaked out, thinking she's about to die again. Somehow, she manages to get rid of the exhibitionist and makes it to the Jiyeon Conservatory's alumni gathering, where she's volunteering as part of the event staff. She's having a good time, enjoying the lively atmosphere and chatting with the conservatory members. But when she returns from a bathroom break, the mood has completely shifted. The room is eerily silent. She asks what happened, but everyone avoids her questions. As she reaches for her phone, ready to leave, the group suddenly grabs her arms. She manages to wrestle free and grab her phone. So, After that weird alumni gathering, Yi-young checks her phone and discovers devastating news. Her boyfriend, Jae-hyung, is cheating on her with Yoon-ju, a famous violinist. Completely heartbroken, she runs to the bathroom and throws up. She ends up leaving the gathering drunk, and as she walks home, memories of happier times with Jae-hyung flood her mind, leaving her sobbing uncontrollably in the street. People start pulling out their phones, eager to capture her misery. Just then, our mysterious stranger appears again and rescues her from the humiliating situation, pulling her away from the crowd and taking her home. Recognizing him, a drunken Yi-young accuses him of being a con artist and causes a scene. He almost leaves her to her own devices, but she grabs his leg and, in a moment of desperation and vulnerability, blurts out that she wants to sleep with him. The stranger is taken aback by her outburst and doesn't know how to react. The next morning, Yi-young wakes up to a call from none other than Yoon-ju, the other woman. Yoon-ju asks Yi-young to meet her at the cafe, where Jae-hyung works. She tells Yi-young she's dumping Jae-hyung, claiming she's bored of him, and then walks away. Just then, Jae-hyung appears, trying to win Yi-young back, but she's having none of it. After letting him have it, she bursts into tears and leaves the cafe. She goes to the convenience store to buy something, and as she pulls out her cash, notices the bill with the stranger's phone number on it. She hesitates for a moment, then puts it back and uses a different bill. Leaving the store, Yi-young calls the stranger and apologizes for her drunken behavior. Then, she makes an unusual request. She asks him to sing her lullabies every night because it's the only way she can sleep. It turns out that the car accident she was in left her with short-term memory loss and severe insomnia. She's tried everything, even sleeping pills, but nothing works. The stranger readily agrees. That night, right on schedule, he calls. He starts singing, and let's just say, his voice is not exactly soothing. It's more like nails on a chalkboard. But, miraculously, it works. Young falls asleep. The stranger calls out her name, but when she doesn't respond, he lets out a chilling chuckle. He pulls out a knife, identical to the one in the flashes of memory Yi-young's been experiencing. The scene flashes back to 1 year earlier, a dark and stormy night. A murder takes place in a desolate field. The victim is a 25-year-old man, and on his hand is a ring that looks exactly like the one in Yi-young's fragmented memories. The next day, Yi-young, thrilled with the stranger's lullaby service, asks him to continue. He agrees, on the condition that she pays him 10,000 won per day, paid weekly in advance. He also adds a clause that the arrangement can only be terminated with mutual consent. So, Yi-young agrees to the stranger's lullaby terms, even though she's a little hesitant about the price. But hey, a good night's sleep is priceless, right? After a practice session, she stops by her favorite BBQ place on the way home. This time, thankfully, she managed to stay sober. She's craving some grilled meat, but her wallet says no. Suddenly, the stranger appears behind her, startling her. Embarrassed, Yi-young tries to leave, but he follows her. He even invites her to hang out, which she obviously refuses. She doesn't even know his name. Seeing that she's not budging, he holds out his hand, reminding her of his payment. Young opens her wallet, but being broke, she can only give him a partial payment and turns to leave. Just then, the stranger offers to buy her some BBQ. Young does a complete 180 and happily joins him for dinner. Over dinner, the stranger notices her drumsticks and asks where she plays. Yi-young tells him about her 17 failed audition attempts and her current unemployment status. She explains how hard she tries, but always gets overwhelmed by nerves. Hearing the word, nerves, the stranger jumps up and sits next to her, demonstrating an ancient stress-relieving technique passed down from his ancestors. He tells her to write the word, person, 3 times on her palm, and then inhale it all at once. Skeptical, Yi-young tries it a few times, but nothing happens. Then she hears the stranger laughing behind her. She realizes she's been tricked. Annoyed, she gets up to leave, but not before reminding him about his lullaby duties. Back home, Yi-young gets ready for bed. Right on time, the stranger calls. His singing is even worse than before, but this time, it makes Yi-young laugh. She falls asleep quickly, happy and relaxed. After the call, the stranger opens a box and pulls out a phone. The wallpaper is a picture of Yi-young with another man, the man with the ring who was murdered. Creepy, right? The next day, Yi-young is teaching drums to some kids when she gets a call from Jiyeon, the conductor. He asks if she's free to grab dessert with him. He buys her ice cream and tells her to be at the Jiyeon conservatory at 10 a.m. the next morning to rehearse for his debut performance. Young can't believe her ears. After 17 rejections, she's finally in. Overwhelmed with joy, she starts dancing around. Just as Jiyeon returns, She freezes, mortified by the awkward situation. He asks her age, then takes her shopping for jewelry and even drives her home. What is going on? Young arrives at the Jiyeon conservatory, excited for her first day. But as soon as she walks in, she's met with whispers and stares. Her friend, Jiyeon, shows her the reason. Photos of her with Jiyeon from the previous day have been leaked online and are now all over social media. Jiyeon advises her to ignore the gossip and introduces Jiyeon to the other musicians. But they're not exactly welcoming. They clearly think she got the job through some kind of special treatment. The first rehearsal begins, and Jiyeon is a nervous wreck. She tries the inhale the person from your palm trick again. Even though she knows it's a hoax, it helps her calm down a bit. Just then, Yoon-ju, the violinist who stole her boyfriend, walks in. She marches up to one of the musicians and slaps him across the face, shocking everyone. She warns them not to send her pictures in the group chat again if they want to keep their playing careers intact. After her dramatic outburst, she heads to her spot to practice. Moments later, Jiyeon enters, and he's not alone. Yang is speechless when she sees who's with him. It's the stranger, the lullaby singer. He walks in without a word and sits down at the piano. Jiyeon introduces him as Jang Yoon, the pianist for his debut performance. Everyone's curious about this mysterious newcomer, so Jiyeon asks Jang Yoon to play something for them. With a completely serious expression, Jang Yoon plays Baby Shark. Everyone bursts out laughing, but the music is surprisingly good. Young stares at him, amazed by his unexpected talent. Jae-ni, seeing Young's reaction, assumes she has a crush on the new pianist. Young tries to explain, but she doesn't know how to describe their unique relationship. Being her first rehearsal, Young inevitably makes mistakes. The tension in the room is thick, and Jiyeon is clearly frustrated. At one point, Young gets so nervous that she drops her drumstick. Everyone is annoyed, and Jiyeon calls an end to the rehearsal. Dejected, Young is leaving when she sees Jang Yoon casually eating ice cream while holding her drumstick. She walks over and takes it back, then heads home. Jang Yoon, sensing her distress, follows her and tries to comfort her, which only makes her angrier. Later that night, Jang Yoon calls for their usual lullaby session, but Young isn't in the mood. He tells her to go to the convenience store, but she refuses. She just wants to be alone with her disappointment. The next morning, after a sleepless night, Young is getting ready for work when she hears noises outside. While brushing her teeth, she peeks out the window and sees someone moving in next door. And guess who it is? Jang Yoon. Shocked, she runs back inside. Later, while buying groceries, she bumps into him again. He invites her to hang out since they don't have rehearsal. But Young ignores him and says she needs to practice. Jang Yoon then mentions knowing someone who could help her with her drumming. Jang Yoon tells Young he knows someone who can help her drumming, and, once again, she gets totally fooled. Instead of a drumming lesson, he takes her on a bizarre outing that involves forced participation in a senior citizen exercise group and a grueling hike up a mountain. When they finally reach the cable car station, it's closed. Furious, Young declares she'll never fall for his tricks again and storms off. Suddenly, Jang Yoon calls out, "How about the cable car tomorrow morning?" Young freezes. She hears the same phrase echoing in her head, in his voice. She turns around and sees him holding the same knife from her disturbing flashbacks. Terrified, she runs. She has a vivid flashback of herself running with that very knife. She trips and falls, and Jang Yoon approaches her, asking if she remembers anything. Young bursts into tears, begging him to leave her alone, saying she doesn't remember a thing. This scene mirrors a moment from a year ago. Young, in a hospital gown, is muttering to herself that she didn't kill anyone. Jang Yoon appears, holding an umbrella, and asks her if she remembers who she killed. Seeing him, Young collapses, unconscious, in the rain. Back in the present, Jang Yoon takes the unconscious Young to the hospital, where he talks to her older sister, who's also Young's doctor. Her sister thanks Jang Yoon for bringing her in, and asks for his name. Just then, Jang Yoon's phone rings. He quickly tells her his name and leaves. Young's sister feels like she's heard the name before, but can't place it. Back home, Jang Yoon watches a news interview with Young's sister discussing Young's condition. She explains that Young has suffered from a rare language disorder since childhood, which causes her to lose her ability to form grammatically correct sentences whenever she experiences severe trauma. This has happened twice before, when her parents died in a car accident when she was 5, and again a year ago, after a major accident. After that accident, Young couldn't speak for a month and is still dealing with the after effects. The next morning, Young wakes up to the news that rehearsal has been moved up an hour. She skips breakfast and rushes to the conservatory. Seeing Jang-yoon, she covers her ears, refusing to listen to anything he says. Inside the rehearsal room, she's informed that Ju-won has changed the piece and only needs one drummer. The assistant tried to call her, but her sister answered and forgot to tell her. Crushed, Yi-young packs her things and leaves the conservatory. Back home, she sits in a corner, sobbing. Jang-yoon calls, but she's too upset to answer. The next day, Yi-young receives a call from Yoon-ju, asking to meet at a cafe. Yoon-ju calls Yi-young about the job offer, but hangs up before Yi-young can respond. At the cafe, Yoon-ju gives Yi-young a business card, explaining that a film crew needs a drummer. She claims it's her way of repaying Yi-young for, well, sleeping with her boyfriend. Young asks why Yoon-ju cares, and Yoon-ju replies that she's realized she should care more about Yi-young, since they were once friends. As Yi-young leaves, she runs into Jang-yoon. She tells him to go away, but he insists on following her. Frustrated, she tells him to stop bothering her, but he just smirks. Annoyed, she ignores him and hops into a taxi. Suddenly, she wonders how he knew she'd be there. She looks out the window and sees him watching her, a chilling look on his face. Back home, Yi-young searches for Jang-yoon online, but finds nothing. He doesn't seem to have any social media presence. Lost in thought, she suddenly hears Jang-yoon playing the piano. It's the middle of the night, and she's about to complain about the noise. As she's leaving her apartment, she notices a footprint on the floor and a few drops of what looks like blood. She decides to investigate and knocks on Jang-yoon's door, complaining about the noise. She sees that his hand is injured and that his shoes match the footprint in her apartment. Convinced he broke in, she panics and runs back to her apartment. Jang-yoon follows her, corners her, and insists he's not stalking her. The next day, Yi-young waits until Jang-yoon is out before going to the trash. But as she's throwing out the garbage, he appears. He grabs her hand and gives her a gift bag. Inside, to her horror, is her bra. Young is completely freaked out and has no idea how it ended up with him. She tells her friend, Jae-ni, about the incident, but Jae-ni dismisses it, suggesting that Yi-young probably hung her laundry carelessly, and it blew onto Jang-yoon's balcony. Then, Jae-ni drops a bombshell. Rumors are circulating that Ju-won is dating Yoon-ju, and that Yoon-ju will be the featured soloist in his debut performance. Yi-young rushes to the conservatory to confront Ju-won. The receptionist tries to stop her, saying Ju-won is resting, but their argument wakes him up. He invites Yi-young in. Yi-young tells him she wants to work at the conservatory, even if it means starting from the bottom. She pleads with him to give her a job. Ju-won agrees, saying he needs an assistant. And just like that, Yi-young becomes Ju-won's assistant. Her first task is cleaning his office. As she's cleaning, the manager walks in, looking for Ju-won. The manager asks Yi-young for Ju-won's location, but she has no idea where he is. Frustrated, the manager tells Yi-young to find Ju-won and bring him to the address on the business card. Young grabs a suit for Ju-won and runs off to find him. She eventually finds him lounging on a stage. She tells him to get changed and go to the meeting, but he refuses. He asks her to come closer and then lie down to listen to something, but Yi-young can't hear anything. She closes her eyes and tries to focus, but still hears nothing. When she opens her eyes, Ju-won is staring at her. Embarrassed, she sits up, but he continues to stare. She closes her eyes again, and Ju-won tells her he sees potential in her. He says that if she hones her skills, they might share a stage someday. Young smiles, dreaming of that possibility. After a long day as Ju-won's assistant, Yi-young returns home and sees Jang-yoon leaving his apartment. She secretly follows him to a strange house. Peeking through the gate, she sees him taking something out of the house. Back in her apartment, Yi-young decides she needs to find out who Jang-yoon really is. Later that night, she hears a noise at her door. She gets into bed and pretends to be asleep, waiting to see what happens. When the moment is right, she jumps out to catch the intruder, but the person escapes. Young yells that there's a burglar. Hearing the commotion, Jang-yoon runs out of his apartment, but the burglar gets away. He tells Yi-young to call the police while he chases after the thief. During the chase, Jang-yoon is injured, but he manages to subdue the burglar and remove their mask. Young arrives just in time to see the burglar's face. It's her ex-boyfriend, Jae-hyung. The police arrive and take him away. Feeling guilty that Jang-yoon was injured because of her, Yi-young becomes his temporary caretaker while his hand heals. Jang-yoon asks Yi-young to drive him somewhere. They enter a house, and Yi-young discovers that Jang-yoon has a younger brother. She asks what he does, and Jang-yoon reveals that his brother was a pianist who was murdered a year ago. Suddenly, Yi-young has another flashback. Startled, She drops and breaks a framed photo of Jang Yoon's brother. Jang Yoon rushes over and grabs her hand. Young has a flashback of being at the airport, picking someone up named Kim Lan. This Kim Lan has the same face as Jang Yoon's brother. Young asks Jang Yoon who killed his brother and what his brother's name was. Jang Yoon replies that his brother was killed by the person he loved most, and that his name was Kim Lan. Young says she's never heard the name Kim Lan and tries to leave, but she steps on broken glass. Jang Yoon bandages her foot and takes her to watch a lunar eclipse. But Young can't shake his words about his brother being killed by the person he loved most. She asks Jang Yoon to tell her more about his brother. He says his brother died in a car accident, which is what his father told him. Young suspects the person Kim Lan loved was driving the car. She tells Jang Yoon about her accident a year ago, which she doesn't remember. Her sister told her it was a taxi accident. Jang Yoon becomes pensive, seemingly lost in thought. He then leads her inside and suggests they play a duet. At the piano, Young notices a handprint carved into the wood. Jang Yoon takes her hand and places it over the print, saying, "Isn't it like you're holding my hand? You and I were here together." Tears stream down Young's face as she listens to his words. She stands up to leave, but Jang Yoon stops her, asking why she's running away. He says he wants to know more about her, things no one else knows, and hopes she understands. Back home, Jang Yoon calls someone and says that Young doesn't remember anything about the accident, Kim Lan, or his death. He says they might have to try a different approach. The next day, Young is working as Ju-won's assistant, this time outdoors for an outdoor rehearsal. She's diligently filming the orchestra when the manager storms over and berates her for not stopping Ju-won from holding the rehearsal outside. Young takes the brunt of the manager's anger, since she can't yell at Ju-won directly. The manager gives Young her business card and tells her to call before Ju-won does anything crazy again. The rehearsal goes well, but as Young is packing up, one of the musicians discovers something is missing. Young kindly helps search for it, but when she finds it, the musician lashes out at her for touching it. Humiliated, Young apologizes. The musician mocks her, saying she's not good enough to be in the orchestra. Young feels the sting of the insult. She's been practicing the drums since she was 12 for 15 years, and she hasn't given up. She approaches the orchestra's drummer, hoping to learn from him. She asks if he offers any drumming lessons, but he just laughs and says he doesn't. Disheartened, Young returns to the office. Ju-won enters and tells her they have a welcome party that evening. He takes her to a restaurant. Coincidentally, the restaurant Ju-won takes Young to is where Jang Yoon works. Jang Yoon comes over to pour them water and asks Young if she slept well. Ju-won gives him a puzzled look, and Young quickly covers for Jang Yoon's odd question. Jang Yoon tries to say something else, but Young interrupts him and excuses herself to the restroom. She pulls Jang Yoon aside and asks him what the heck he's doing, questioning why he brought up their nighttime calls in front of Ju-won. Suddenly, Jang Yoon pushes Young against the wall, saying he doesn't like seeing her having dinner with another man. Stunned, Young watches him walk away. Later, rumors about Young and Ju-won's dinner explode online. Upset by the gossip, Young goes to the convenience store and sits down. Jang Yoon appears and sits across from her. She finds herself explaining that she and Ju-won aren't dating and that the rumors are false. Jang Yoon then asks if she thinks he likes her. He adds that caring about someone and liking them are two different things. Young feels like he's toying with her. She pays him for his lullaby services and tells him not to call her anymore. But that night Jang Yoon calls. When she doesn't answer, he shows up at her door. He reminds her that their agreement can only be terminated with mutual consent, and he doesn't agree. He wants to talk to her about her. They go somewhere private, and Young opens up about being an orphan. She tells him about her parents' fatal car accident and the trauma that followed. She couldn't speak for 4 years and suffered from severe insomnia. Jang Yoon shares a bit about himself, mentioning his piano skills and his wealthy family. Young calls him arrogant and says he probably doesn't have any friends. Just then, Young twists her ankle, and Jang Yoon catches her. They share an awkward moment, and then Young blurts out, "Can I kiss you?" They both freeze. When Jang Yoon doesn't respond, Young turns to leave. Suddenly, he pulls her back and kisses her. It seems like their relationship has just taken a major turn. The next day, Young is buying breakfast when she runs into the musician, who lost their instrument during rehearsal. She tries to say hello, but the musician ignores her. Suddenly, the musician is mugged. Young chases after the thief and catches them. The musician catches up and sits on the mugger's face. Thanks to this incident, the musician warms up to Young and puts in a good word with the orchestra's drummer. Jiyeon gets a spot in the drumming class, with a 50% discount. That evening, Jiyeon attends a professor's party with Ju-won. They play a game, and Jiyeon volunteers to fetch the game pieces. Young enters a room at the party, and is shocked to see a picture of Kim Lan. Ju-won, noticing her absence, follows her and sees the picture too. Jiyeon asks him if he knows Kim Lan. Ju-won stares at her, and a flashback shows him at the scene of the accident, dressed in black, looking down at Kim Lan's body. Ju-won says he and Kim Lan knew each other from a music lovers club. He recalls seeing Jiyeon and a friend attending a performance there. Jiyeon says she doesn't remember any of this. Ju-won quickly changes the subject, telling her not to dwell on forgotten memories. After seeing the picture, Jiyeon is convinced she's heard Kim Lan's piano playing somewhere before. She searches online and finds only an obituary. She asks Jae-ni and learns that she used to help Kim Lan, but she has no memory of it. At the conservatory, Jiyeon sees Jang-yoon and tries to greet him, but he avoids her. In the restroom, she wonders if he's ignoring her because of the kiss. She asks to talk to him and questions if he ignores women after kissing them. She apologizes if he kissed her because she asked him to. She then tells him that Jae-ni mentioned she used to be Kim Lan's assistant, but she has no recollection of it. She tells Jang-yoon she wants to remember. He watches her, a thoughtful expression on his face. That night, Jang-yoon meets someone at a bar. The person tells him that Young Gil, the driver responsible for the accident, has been released from prison early. Someone paid his bail, but they're still investigating who. Jang-yoon is troubled, still convinced that the person his brother loved most was responsible for his death. Back home, Jang-yoon finds Jiyeon being harassed by her ex-boyfriend. He steps in, pretending to be her boyfriend, and scares the ex away. He tells Jiyeon he wants to take her to the place where Kim Lan died. The next day at work, Yoon-ju bursts in and attacks Jiyeon. It turns out she's lost her solo spot in Ju-won's debut performance. Yoon-ju blames Jiyeon, recalling a time when she fainted and Jiyeon took her to the hospital. Young learned about Yoon-ju's wrist condition there. A wrist problem could end a violinist's career. Yoon-ju believes Jiyeon told everyone about her condition, costing her the solo. Ju-won intervenes, saying Jiyeon has nothing to do with it. He noticed Yoon-ju's wrist problem during her previous performance. Ju-won tells Yoon-ju to seek treatment for her wrist, and that he'll be removing her from his debut performance. Yoon-ju protests, but Ju-won stands firm and asks her to leave. Later that day, Jang-yoon buys white chrysanthemums and takes Jiyeon to the place where Kim Lan died. He tells her it was raining heavily that day, a hit-and-run accident. The driver confessed 4 hours later, claiming he wasn't sure if he hit Kim Lan due to the downpour. The person Kim Lan loved was found unconscious elsewhere the next day. Strangely, they were together, yet one died and the other survived. Young suggests Jang-yoon should investigate the events of that day. Jang-yoon's demeanor suddenly changes. He says he wants to investigate more than anyone. Kim Lan was the most important person in his life. Seeing his brother in the morgue devastated him. He hates himself for not protecting his brother. Jiyeon suggests he ask the person Kim Lan loved about that day, since she's still alive. Jang-yoon says he wants to, but she doesn't remember anything. He lies to Jiyeon, saying he doesn't know who she is or where she is. On the way back, Jiyeon asks Jang-yoon to stop the car. She gets out and recognizes something familiar, but she can't quite place it. She tells Jang-yoon she feels like she's been there before. They enter what looks like an abandoned warehouse. Memories flood back, and Jiyeon clutches her head in pain and screams. Suddenly, the door slams shut behind them. Young panics, yelling to be let out. Jang-yoon helps her calm down, and eventually, the police arrive and open the door. Jang-yoon takes a shaken Jiyeon home. Her sister sees them together and asks where they've been. Young tells her that Jang-yoon is Kim Lan's older brother. Her sister becomes thoughtful, as if something has clicked in her memory. Later, while Jiyeon is sleeping, she receives a call from an unknown number. She answers, but all she hears is music before the call ends. Frightened, she goes downstairs to find Jang-yoon. He lets her in and gives her some warm water to calm her nerves. Young takes him to the piano and asks him to play something for her. As he's playing, a photo falls out. Young picks it up and is stunned to see a picture of herself with Kim Lan. They look happy together. Jiyeon asks Jang-yoon if she is the person Kim Lan loves. Jang-yoon calmly takes the photo and says he doesn't know. Young asks for the photo, wanting to remember her connection with Kim Lan. The next day, back at the conservatory, Jiyeon is running errands for Ju-won. She's handing out sheet music when someone recognizes the music and tells her that they are Kim Lan's mother. She shares a disturbing rumor. that Kim Lan was born out of wedlock, and his father killed him and staged it as an accident. After rehearsal, Jang Yoon meets Yi Young's sister, who's been waiting for him. She accuses him of getting close to Yi Young because of Kim Lan's death. Jang Yoon reveals that the police found Yi Young's bag in Kim Lan's car, and that there was a knife wound on his brother's body. Yi Young's sister throws water in his face and warns him to stay away from her sister, insisting Yi Young had nothing to do with the accident. Jang Yoon then visits his father, who tells him to return to America and continue his studies, to stop digging into Kim Lan's death, and leave Yi Young alone. Jang Yoon refuses, accusing his father of only caring about himself. He points out that his father didn't allow an autopsy and immediately cremated Kim Lan's body, preventing a thorough investigation. He asks his father directly if the rumors about him killing Kim Lan are true, and his father slaps him in response. Meanwhile, Yi Young asks her sister if she remembers the accident from last year, the one where Jang Yoon's brother died, and mentions that Jang Yoon took her to the place where it happened. Her sister reacts strongly, telling her to stay away from Jang Yoon. Everyone thinks her reaction is extreme, but she leaves without further explanation. It turns out Yi Young's sister found a video of Yi Young recounting a dream. In the video, Yi Young describes holding a bloody knife. Remembering Jang Yoon's words about the knife wound on Kim Lan's body, she panics. She copies the video to a USB drive and deletes it from her computer, not wanting Yi Young to remember. Yi Young finds Jang Yoon waiting for her at her apartment. He asks her on a date and takes her to a rage room, where they smash things to relieve stress. Afterward, they go for drinks. Back home, Yi Young receives another call from an unknown number. This time, there's just music playing again. The next day at work, Yoon-ju calls Yi Young and asks if she remembers their teaching assistant from college. It was Jang Yoon, but he used a different name. This means Jang Yoon is using a fake identity. Yoon-ju also discovered that Kim Lan was Jang Yoon's brother, and that Kim Lan's real name was also Jang Yoon. She questions Yi Young, but Yi Young doesn't remember anything. Yoon-ju gives up, thinking it's a waste of time. Ju-won calls Jang Yoon in and asks him why he's using a false identity. Yoon-ju told him. Jang Yoon calmly says it's personal and refuses to elaborate. Outside, Jang Yoon runs into Yi Young and tells her he's taking her somewhere tomorrow. Excited, Yi Young returns home and bumps into someone with a distinctive scar on their hand. Young returns home to find small red drops, like blood, on her floor. The photo of her and Kim Lan is gone. She suspects her ex-boyfriend and calls him, but he doesn't answer. Meanwhile, the ex is with Jang Yoon, showing him a photo of Jang Yoon's conversation with Yi Young's sister, threatening him to stay away from Yi Young. Jang Yoon is surprised by the ex's audacity, but ignores the threat. The next morning, Yi Young's mother makes her go on a blind date. Dressed up, she leaves her apartment and bumps into Jang Yoon, who gives her a knowing smile. Annoyed, she tries to walk past him but trips and falls into his arms. Embarrassed, she quickly excuses herself and heads to her date. Before the date, she stops by her ex's place and demands he return the photo. But he denies knowing anything about it. He claims he wouldn't be stupid enough to break into her apartment twice. Confused, Yi Young goes on her date, realizing her ex's shoes don't match the footprints in her apartment. She quickly ends the date, telling the guy she's already interested in someone else. Afterward, she meets up with Jang Yoon for their date. They have a fun time shopping and eating. Back at her apartment building, Yi Young hesitates. She tells Jang Yoon about the break-in and the missing photo. Jang Yoon enters her apartment and looks around, advising her to change her locks and stay at his place for the night. Later, Jang Yoon meets his contact at the bar. The contact has found the officer who took Yi Young's statement after the accident. Since the driver had already confessed, Yi Young's statement wasn't included in the report. The officer recalls that Yi Young was distraught, repeatedly saying she might have stabbed someone. Back at his apartment, Jang Yoon watches a sleeping Yi Young and pulls out a photo album filled with pictures of her, all taken by Kim Lan. The next morning, Yi Young wakes up feeling refreshed, like she hasn't had insomnia in ages. She confesses her feelings to Jang Yoon, but he rejects her, saying their relationship won't have a happy ending. Heartbroken, Yi Young demands an explanation. Jang Yoon reveals that Kim Lan had a stab wound, unrelated to the car accident, and that she might be the one who stabbed him. He also admits that she was the person his brother loved most. Devastated, Yi Young demands to know everything. Jang Yoon tells Yi Young that her bag was found in Kim Lan's car, and that he found a bloody knife near where she had collapsed. Yi Young is heartbroken, realizing Jang Yoon had an ulterior motive for getting close to her. He suspected her of being a murderer. Yi Young returns home, desperately trying to remember, but her mind remains blank. Distraught, she goes to work, barely able to function. During rehearsal, she accidentally mixes up the sheet music, disrupting the practice. She quickly apologizes and collects the incorrect sheets. Jae-ni notices Yi-young's distress and tries to talk to her, but Yi-young refuses to open up. Suddenly, Yi-young asks Jae-ni if she ever told her about dating Kim Lan. Jae-ni says no, she'd never mentioned anything like that. Confused and troubled, Yi-young walks away, wondering why her bag was in Kim Lan's car and why Jang Yoon said she was the person Kim Lan loved. Just then, she sees Jang Yoon. She turns and runs, but he catches her. She begs him to leave her alone, saying she doesn't want to talk to anyone. He pleads with her to remember, saying only she knows what happened that night. Yi-young is devastated by his words. She asks him what will happen if she does remember. If she killed his brother, how is she supposed to live with that? She accuses him of only seeing her as the woman who killed his brother, and that their time together was a lie. She regrets ever developing feelings for him. She walks away, leaving Jang Yoon standing there, heartbroken. Ju-won sees Yi-young crying and asks Jang Yoon why he made her cry. Jang Yoon snaps back, accusing Ju-won of being too interested in his employees' personal lives. Ju-won admits he cares about Yi-young because he likes her. Jang Yoon is taken aback and watches Ju-won walk away. Ju-won approaches Yi-young and tells her he wants to take her somewhere. He brings her to his grandmother's house in the countryside. Upon arrival, his grandmother playfully scolds him and sends him off to wait. It's been a while since Ju-won has been home, and he's in a good mood. He even helps his grandmother cook for Yi-young. After dinner, they relax and stargaze. Yi-young and Ju-won stay the night, but there's only one bed, so Ju-won sleeps outside, battling mosquitoes. In the middle of the night, Yi-young hears him swatting at the insects and laughs. She goes outside to check if he's still alive. Ju-won finds Yi-young outside and offers her an earbud. They sit together, listening to music under the moonlight. Young falls asleep and has a disturbing dream. She's being chased by someone. She runs, stumbles, and rolls down a hill. In a hazy moment, she sees a large scar on the person's hand. She wakes up and goes outside to find Ju-won's grandmother preparing ingredients for her shop. Young helps her make noodles. The grandmother asks if she's still feeling down, pointing out that it's written all over her face. She encourages Yi-young to face her problems head-on instead of running away. Life is full of troubles, and she needs to learn to fight them. Young is touched by her words and tears up. Ju-won overhears their conversation and looks thoughtful. He drives Yi-young home, and they run into Jang Yoon. Jang Yoon, seeing them together, asks where they've been. When Yi-young doesn't answer, he tells her to stop running and try to remember. Young grabs his arm, angrily denying that she's running. She challenges him to prove she is Kim Lan's girlfriend. Jang Yoon takes her to his apartment and shows her a photo album filled with pictures of her. She recognizes the locations and activities in the photos. They're all places Jang Yoon has taken her. It was all part of his plan. Young asks to see the knife he found. He hands it to her, and as she touches it, fragmented memories and voices flood her mind. She drops the knife, horrified. She sees a vision of her hand covered in blood, the knife in Kim Lan's chest. She runs out of Jang Yoon's apartment, collapsing outside in tears. She goes to the hospital and tells her sister everything. Her sister wants to confront Jang Yoon, but Yi-young pulls away, tearfully admitting that Jang Yoon might be right. Her sister tells her to calm down, that it could all be a hallucination, and begs her to never see Jang Yoon again. Young agrees and leaves. She receives an invitation to a birthday party for one of the orchestra members. There, she runs into Jang Yoon. They're both asked to sing. Young's voice is amazing, but Jang Yoon's, not so much. As he sings, Yi-young starts crying, using alcohol to numb the pain. Drunk, she starts acting out with Jang Yoon again. Jang Yoon takes Yi-young back to his apartment. She tells him she'll take responsibility for surviving, and will try to bear that burden for the rest of her life. She starts to leave, but Jang Yoon pulls her into a hug, wipes away her tears, and kisses her. The next morning, Jang Yoon wakes up to a text from Yi-young. She says she remembers small fragments of memories, that the knife he has is hers, and that she stabbed Kim Lan with it, but she still doesn't remember why. She says she needs time to figure things out, and will be gone for a while. Young takes the knife and goes to the abandoned warehouse, where she and Jang Yoon are trapped. Unbeknownst to her, a man in black is following her. She enters the warehouse and looks around. Suddenly, the door slams shut, and the man appears. He shines a flashlight in her face and speaks to her as if they know each other. Young doesn't understand what he's saying. He continues, claiming they faced life or death situations together a year ago, in that very warehouse. Terrified, Yi-young backs away. telling him to stay back. He demands she hand over what Kim Lan hid. Young is confused, saying she doesn't remember anything. She raises the knife towards him. The man laughs, saying she stabbed Kim Lan with that same knife. Young begs him to tell her what happened a year ago. Seeing her confusion, he laughs again, saying he now understands why she's been living peacefully, why those in power let her go. Suddenly, someone calls out Yi Young's name from outside. The man covers her mouth and holds the knife to her throat, telling her to be quiet. Jang Yoon bursts in. The man, seeing him, runs away. Jang Yoon rushes to Yi Young, tending to her wound and helping her up. He calls someone, asking about the attacker, but gets no information. Young returns to her normal routine, continuing her work as Ju-won's assistant. Ju-won enters the office and finds her engrossed in something. She tells him she's sending his grandmother a video of their rehearsal. She stands up to ask him what they're having for dinner, and he suddenly hugs her, thanking her for everything. They hear a noise and see someone running away. Young chases after the figure, but they disappear. As she's leaving, Jang Yoon stops her and asks about the incident at the warehouse. Young says the man seemed to have been following her. He told her they met at the warehouse a year ago. After the warehouse incident, Yi Young cries and tells Jang Yoon that she stabbed Kim Lan and that they shouldn't see each other again. Back home, she searches for what the attacker is talking about and finds a strange object in her origami crane. A USB drive. She plugs it into her computer and finds audio recordings of conversations with her sister from her hospital stay a year ago. In the recordings, she talks about a dream where she was holding a bloody knife. The next day at the conservatory, a rumor spreads that Yi Young is dating Ju-won, accompanied by a photo of them hugging in the office. Yi Young finds Ju-won addressing the rumor. Yoon-ju gives him a look and leaves. Yi Young follows her and insists there's nothing between her and Ju-won. Yoon-ju says she doesn't care and warns Yi Young that Ju-won is ruthless and would do anything, even kill, to get what he wants, and that he's not right for her. Afterward, Yi Young asks Ju-won for time off to help her aunt at the flower shop. He agrees, on the condition that he goes with her. At the flower shop, Ju-won helps deliver flowers, and Yi Young's aunt is thrilled to see her niece with a man. She quickly spreads the news. Just then, the familiar attacker enters the shop, asking for a job. The aunt hires him on the spot, needing extra help. Meanwhile, Yi Young asks her sister about the recordings, begging her to tell her everything she knows. Her sister finally reveals that Yi Young disappeared the night of the music club performance. She was on duty at the hospital and didn't know anything until the police contacted her the next morning about Yi Young's bag being found in Kim Lan's car. They filed a missing person report. Yi Young was later found near the highway and brought to the hospital, where she woke up in a daze. Her sister gives Yi Young a USB drive with a month's worth of their conversations. She still believes it's all in Yi Young's imagination, attributing it to the trauma of the accident. Meanwhile, Jang Yoon is still searching for the attacker from the warehouse. He finally learns that the man is Young Gil, the driver of the accident. He tracks Young Gil down and follows him, but is quickly spotted. Young Gil laughs and calls Jang Yoon by a different name. Jang Yoon confronts Young Gil, asking if he killed his brother or if someone else was involved. Young Gil laughs, saying the killer is right under his nose and that he should look closer. Jang Yoon asks what Young Gil wants from Yi Young, but he refuses to answer, instead offering Jang Yoon 3 billion won. Jang Yoon tells him to leave Yi Young alone. Young Gil laughs again, saying he saw Yi Young stab Kim Lan with his own eyes, and questions why Jang Yoon is protecting his brother's killer. Enraged, Jang Yoon punches Young Gil and leaves. He calls Yi Young to meet him at the convenience store. As he hangs up, a masked figure attacks him with a metal pipe. Jang Yoon loses consciousness, while Yi Young waits for him at the store. Growing worried, Yi Young goes looking for him. As she walks down the street, calling his name, she sees a familiar figure lying in a pool of blood. Horrified, she rushes to Jang Yoon and takes him to the hospital. Seeing him so vulnerable, she's overwhelmed with worry and stays by his side all night. The next morning, Yi Young is relieved to see Jang Yoon awake. She tells him she found him unconscious and asks what happened. Jang Yoon downplays the incident, not wanting to tell her about his confrontation with Young Gil and the attack. Young doesn't believe him, but she doesn't press further and leaves him to rest. At the conservatory, Yi Young is talking to Ju-won when Yoon-ju bursts in and slaps him. It turns out Ju-won dumped Yoon-ju the night before, but she was too drunk to react. Now, sober, she's returned to deliver the slap she felt he deserved. Young is shocked by the dramatic scene and follows Yoon-ju, asking why she slapped him. She warns Yoon-ju that the incident could cost her her job implying that things wouldn't have turned out this way if it weren't for her. Yoonju tells Yi-young that if she wants things to go back to the way they were, she should leave. Yi-young, looking at her own hands as if seeing blood on them, starts to cry, questioning her own role in everything. Later, Yi-young receives a call from her aunt, inviting Ju-won over for dinner to thank him for helping with the flower deliveries. Yi-young tries to refuse, but her aunt insists. She reluctantly agrees to ask him, but tells her aunt that Ju-won isn't at the conservatory. He's at Shinyoung School. Ju-won confronts Professor Kang, accusing him of attacking Jang Yoon and telling him to stop his pointless games. Professor Kang is furious at Ju-won's interference and tells him that everything that happened is his fault. He claims Kim Lan wouldn't have died if it weren't for Ju-won. Ju-won retorts that if Professor Kang believes that, he should go to the police. Professor Kang laughs, saying they've been in this together for a long time. Ju-won shouts that they were never on the same side. He only wanted to be a conductor, unlike Professor Kang, who exploited his poor students to launder money. Professor Kang is enraged but can't do anything. After work, Professor Kang runs into Young Gil, who suggests they have coffee. Young Gil mentions Kim Lan's older brother and cryptically asks who should receive it if he finds it. He gives Professor Kang an address and tells him to leave money there if he wants to live. Meanwhile, Yi-young struggles in her kitchen, finally managing to make porridge for Jang Yoon. She takes it to the hospital and feeds him. After one bite, Jang Yoon starts coughing. Young tastes the porridge and realizes it's incredibly salty. She offers to make more, but Jang Yoon insists it's fine and finishes it. They go outside to look at the stars. Jang Yoon confesses that he initially resented Yi-young, believing she was faking her amnesia, but he found himself caring for her. He tried to ignore his feelings, but he couldn't deny his heart. He tells her he's confused about his feelings. Back in the hospital room, Jang Yoon takes Yi-young's hand and asks her to sing him a lullaby. She sings him a love song instead. After he falls asleep, Yi-young finds Kim Lan's handprint on a sheet of music in the room. She quickly closes it and leaves. The next morning, Jang Yoon wakes up and texts Yi-young, but gets no reply. Members of the orchestra, including Jae-ni, visit him. He asks if Yi-young is working today. Jae-ni tells him she took the day off. Another colleague mentioned that Yi-young submitted her resignation. Jae-ni quickly denies it and pulls the colleague out of the room. As soon as they leave, Jang Yoon calls Yi-young. Young goes to the police station and confesses to stabbing Kim Lan. The officer takes her to a private room and makes a phone call. Afterward, he tells Yi-young she can go. Yi-young insists on confessing, but the officer says she's making things difficult for him. He escorts her out, telling her the case is closed and won't be reopened. Jang Yoon, unable to reach Yi-young, goes looking for her. He sees Young Gil getting into a taxi and follows him. Young Gil gets out and goes to a meeting place. As Jang Yoon is about to follow, another car arrives, and his father gets out. Jang Yoon takes pictures of his father meeting with Young Gil. After they both leave, Jang Yoon confronts Young Gil, asking about his relationship with his father. Young Gil laughs and tells him to ask his father himself. Getting nowhere with Young Gil, Jang Yoon goes to his father's secretary, who has always been helpful to him. He shows the secretary the photos and asks about the connection between Young Gil and his father. The secretary says he can't answer, as it affects his livelihood, and advises Jang Yoon to go home and rest. Jang Yoon waits for Yi-young outside her apartment, but she avoids him. He receives a text and leaves to meet Yoon-ju at a cafe. He confronts Yoon-ju about meeting with his father. She admits to offering his father a deal, protection in exchange for getting Jang Yoon to return to him. But his father refused, and instead joined the board of directors of the Shinyoung Corporation. Jang Yoon tells her to get to the point. Yoon-ju wants to know why Jang Yoon is using a fake name, and why he's getting close to Yi-young. She claims she saw something the night of Kim Lan's accident. Jang Yoon asks what she wants. Yoon-ju wants Ju-won fired from the orchestra. She reveals that on the night of the accident, the carpool to conductor Song's house was full, so she and Yi-young were waiting for a taxi. Kim Lan stopped and offered Yi-young a ride. They left together, and Yoon-ju noticed Ju-won's car following them. Meanwhile, Yi-young is home, asleep. She dreams of being trapped in the warehouse with Kim Lan, a dark figure approaching with a knife. Yi-young wakes up to a text from Ju-won, saying he's on his way to her apartment. She rushes downstairs and finds him there. He hugs her tightly, and she quickly pushes him away. Just then, her phone rings. She turns to see Jang Yoon watching them, phone in hand, his eyes burning with jealousy. Ju-won greets Jang Yoon curtly and takes Yi-young to dinner. Yi-young asks Ju-won why he came to her apartment. He confesses his feelings for her. Jiyeon admits she's in love with someone else. Ju-won correctly guesses it's Jang Yoon, but he accepts her rejection gracefully, saying he doesn't expect her to reciprocate his unrequited feelings. After Ju-won leaves, Jiyeon finds Jang Yoon waiting for her. He asks where she's been and why she didn't answer his calls. Jiyeon tells him she went to the police station to confess, but they dismissed her, saying the case was closed. Jang Yoon scolds her for being foolish, asking if she wants to be locked up. Tearfully, Jiyeon says she wants to do something for Kim Lan to ease her guilt. She can't accept Jang Yoon's feelings until she understands what happened to his brother. Jang Yoon hugs her, trying to comfort her. She pulls away and goes home. The next morning, Ju-won takes Jiyeon to his grandmother's house for dinner. As they're enjoying their meal, the doorbell rings. Young opens the door and is stunned to see Young Gil standing there. Ju-won's grandmother calls out Young Gil's name, and Ju-won turns around, his face darkening as their eyes meet. After leaving Ju-won's grandmother's house, Young Gil visits Professor Kang. He returns the money, saying it's not enough to bother with. He reveals that Jang Yoon's father is the new member of the Shineyoung Corporation's board. Upon learning Jang Yoon's father's identity, Professor Kang orders his subordinate to block him from joining the board. Meanwhile, Jang Yoon confronts his father about meeting with Young Gil. It turns out Young Gil threatened to expose Jang Yoon for assaulting him, so they met to resolve the issue. Jang Yoon tells his father that even if he joins the board to get rid of him, he won't leave, because Kim Lan's killer is at the conservatory. After Jang Yoon leaves, his father calls Yoon Ju, offering her what she wants in exchange for information about Professor Kang. Yoon Ju tells Jang Yoon she doesn't want to see Ju-won conducting ever again. Jang Yoon then confronts Ju-won, holding the knife and asking if he killed Kim Lan. Ju-won of course denies it, even taking the knife from Jang Yoon and toying with it, suggesting that Jang Yoon is threatening the conductor. Jang Yoon, getting nowhere, leaves the knife and walks away. The manager arrives and tells Ju-won that Jang Yoon is the son of the new board member. Ju-won is surprised and sighs, clearly troubled. Later that night, Jiyeon goes to the conservatory to secretly watch Jang Yoon practice. Ju-won catches her and asks why she's hiding. Young says she decided not to see Jang Yoon again, afraid of hurting him, but her heart led her there. Inside, Jang Yoon is unconsciously playing the lullaby Jiyeon sang to him at the hospital. Tears stream down Jiyeon's face. Unable to control her emotions, she leaves. She calls her sister, saying she wants to come home. Her sister finds her sobbing on a street corner and takes her home. Young gives her sister her phone, asking her to keep it and not give it back, even if she begs for it. The next morning, Jiyeon tells her sister she'll resign from Shineyoung after the debut performance. Her sister objects, reminding her how hard she worked to get the job. It's Jiyeon's dream, and her sister won't let her throw it away. Young argues that she can't perform, knowing she stabbed Kim Lan. She can't pretend she doesn't know. Their aunt bursts in, asking who Jiyeon stabbed. Her sister pulls her out of the room, promising to explain later. Young goes back to her apartment to get some things, and runs into Jang Yoon. She tries to leave, but he stops her, asking why she's avoiding him. He says he was frantic when she didn't come home, worried sick about her. He confesses his love for her is genuine, and that he's afraid no matter what happens. He tells her to run as long as she needs to, but to run somewhere he can find her. Jiyeon calls her sister, who says everything is okay, and tells her to stay where she is. Young packs a bag and leaves. Passing by her aunt's flower shop, she sees someone trying to break in. She asks who they are. Young Gil takes off his hat, and Jiyeon is relieved to recognize him as her aunt's new employee. But when he puts it back on, she notices a scar on his hand. A flashback hits her. He was the one chasing her the night Kim Lan died. Young Gil laughs, seeing that she recognizes him. Young demands to know why he's at her aunt's shop and what his motive is. He says he's looking for something. If he finds it, he'll disappear quietly. Young asks what he's looking for, offering to help him find it if he promises to leave her family alone. Young Gil grabs her arm, saying she shouldn't play games. He can't tell her what he's looking for, because she might give it to someone else if she finds it. Young promises to give it to him, saying she'll do anything to make him leave. Young Gil reveals that someone else was at the warehouse that night, but she needs to remember who. That person might be Kim Lan's real killer. He asks Young if she has a Shineyoung Conservatory souvenir pen. If so, he wants her to bring it to him, unopened. In exchange, he'll tell her who is at the warehouse. Jiyeon searches her aunt's house, but can't find the pen. Thinking it might be at Jang Yoon's apartment, she goes there, but he's not home. As she's about to ring the doorbell, he appears behind her, teasing her about wearing mismatched shoes, and lets her in. He shows her Kim Lan's belongings, including his phone. While he's distracted, Jiyeon finds the pen and hides it. She tells Jang Yoon about her encounter with Young Gil, omitting the deal she made. Jang Yoon confronts Young Gil, asking what he's looking for and how much it's worth. Young Gil demands 3 billion won. Jang Yoon scoffs, telling him to name a price he can actually afford. Young Gil then tells him to fill a large bag with 50,000 won bills, until it's too heavy to carry. He then asks for Jang Yoon's phone to enter his number. Jang Yoon asks his father for the money. His father, sensing it's related to Kim Lan's death, agrees to lend him the money on the condition that he leave Shinyoung. After Jang Yoon leaves, his father goes to the board meeting and calls for Ju Won's dismissal. Professor Kang tries to stop Jang Yoon's father from dismissing Ju Won, but the chairman says he needs time to think. Professor Kang warns Ju Won that he's about to be fired. Ju Won tells him to stop it, threatening to take him down with him. Professor Kang shouts that Ju Won is the real killer, claiming Kim Lan wouldn't have died if Ju Won hadn't given Jiyeon the knife. Ju Won tells him to shut up. Jiyeon gives Young Gil the pen. He immediately goes back on their deal. Furious, Jiyeon accuses him of being a con man. Young Gil laughs, saying the world made him this way. He tells her not to worry, promising her a big surprise if he dies. Young tells him to never show his face again, and leaves. Young Gil goes to Professor Kang, telling him to prepare the money. He'll give him the pen after receiving the payment. Professor Kang eagerly reaches for the pen, but Young Gil pushes him back. The professor agrees to pay half up front, and the other half after Young Gil deals with Ju Won. Young Gil laughs, saying he's changed his mind and will keep the pen. He then visits Jang Yoon, who asks him what happened that night, promising to get the money. Young Gil reveals that Jiyeon didn't kill Kim Lan. While she did stab him, it wasn't fatal. He offers no further details without the money. On the night of Ju Won's debut performance, Young Gil brings him flowers, but can't find him. He leaves the flowers with the assistant and continues searching. He finds Ju Won and tells him he has what he's looking for, that Jiyeon gave it to him. He demands the money. Ju Won says he'll meet him after the performance, but Young Gil refuses, saying others want it too. He reveals that Professor Kang already paid him half and asked him to deal with Ju Won. Young Gil pats Ju Won on the shoulder, telling him to enjoy his performance, as it might be his last, and leaves. Jang Yoon overhears their conversation. The performance is a resounding success. Later, Jang Yoon finds Ju Won, mentioning he saw him talking to Young Gil. Ju Won denies knowing anyone named Young Gil. Before Jang Yoon can press further, the manager arrives and takes Ju Won away. Meanwhile, Young Gil is found lying in a pool of blood. Jang Yoon, filled with questions, attends the celebratory party but leaves early, feeling uneasy. He asks to meet Jiyeon. He takes her to the concert hall, saying that someday they'll stand on that stage together. He reveals that he met with Young Gil and tells her that Kim Lan didn't die from her stab wound, but was murdered, so she shouldn't blame herself. Meanwhile, after the conservatory closes, a security guard finds Young Gil's body at the bottom of the stairs. News of his death spreads quickly, shocking everyone. Jiyeon finds Jang Yoon and confesses that Young Gil's death is her fault, explaining their deal. Jang Yoon is furious but quickly composes himself, knowing anger won't help. He confronts Ju Won, asking if he pushed Young Gil down the stairs. Ju Won denies it, claiming he doesn't know Young Gil. Jang Yoon asks if Ju Won was at the warehouse that night. Ju Won doesn't answer. Jang Yoon calls him disgusting. Ju Won turns and says Jang Yoon doesn't know anything. Kim Lan was a beloved junior colleague and a friend for 10 years, and tells Jang Yoon never to say such disgusting things again. Jang Yoon goes to the scene of Young Gil's death, searching for clues but finds nothing. Young arrives, and Jang Yoon stops her. She remembers Young Gil's promise of a gift if he died. Jang Yoon suggests they look for it, hoping it's a clue. Young goes to the bar Young Gil frequented. The police arrive, asking the bartender about Young Gil. The bartender says he last saw Young Gil the previous day, leaving with a bouquet of yellow roses. Young remembers seeing those roses in Ju Won's office. Meanwhile, Ju Won secretly meets with Professor Kang, asking if he killed Young Gil. The professor laughs, implying that Ju Won did it. They argue about Kim Lan, with Ju Won accusing Professor Kang of harming him. The professor tells Ju Won to stop accusing him and to leave him alone. Jang Yoon secretly records their conversation. He confronts Professor Kang, demanding the truth, but the professor just laughs and walks away. Back at his office, Ju Won finds Jiyeon holding the knife. After hearing the conversation at the bar, she searched Ju Won's office and found the knife in his desk drawer. Young asked Ju Won if he was at the warehouse that night. He claims he was too tired and went home, saying Jang Yoon gave him the knife. Yang Young is skeptical. She tells him she's remembered some things and is certain she saw him at the warehouse. He insists she's mistaken. Young asks if he killed Kim Lan and Young Gil. Angrily, Ju-won tells her to bring proof or stop accusing innocent people. Devastated, Young leaves with the knife. She meets with Jang Yoon and tells him Ju-won was at the warehouse, recognizing him despite the mask. She shows him the knife from Ju-won's office and asks why he gave it to Ju-won. Jang Yoon explains that he confronted Ju-won after Yoon-ju told him about Ju-won. Following them the night of the accident, Ju-won claimed he knew nothing. Jang Yoon reveals that his real name is Do-hoon and that he took Kim Lan's name, hoping it would trigger Young's memories. He throws the knife into a lake, wanting Young to forget the painful memories associated with it. The next day, Jang Yoon confronts Ju-won with the recording of his conversation with Professor Kang, asking why he blamed the professor. Ju-won tells him to ask Professor Kang himself. Jang Yoon questions why Ju-won, Kim Lan's close friend and junior colleague, is being so secretive, asking if that's how he honors Kim Lan's memory. Ju-won says Jang Yoon doesn't understand anything. They come from different worlds. Someone born with everything can't understand someone who sold an organ for money. He tells Jang Yoon to leave him alone. Jang Yoon refuses, vowing to pursue the truth. Back in his office, Ju-won has a flashback to his argument with Young Gil, which ended with Young Gil accidentally falling down the stairs. Ju-won is the one who killed Young Gil. It was all an act. Jang Yoon goes to Young Gil's place, searching for the gift he promised Young. The manager tells him Young Gil left a bag there, but someone picked it up. Jang Yoon asks to see the security footage. Jang Yoon, plagued by doubts, attends the post-performance celebration, but leaves early and asks to meet Young. He takes her to the concert hall and tells her they'll stand on that stage together someday. He then reveals that Kim Lan didn't die from her stab wound. He was murdered. She shouldn't blame herself. Meanwhile, security footage reveals Ju-won taking Young Gil's bag. Jang Yoon is arrested for Young Gil's murder, based on footage of their earlier fight and his connection to Kim Lan. The news breaks, and the police search Jang Yoon's apartment. His father rushes to the police station, and Jang Yoon begs him to get him out, claiming he knows who killed Young Gil. He accuses Ju-won and suggests that Ju-won and Professor Kang might also be responsible for Kim Lan's death. Jang Yoon is released the next day and immediately goes to see Young. They visit Professor Song, Kim Lan's mentor. Professor Song reveals that Kim Lan was in love with Young, but she was interested in someone else, so he remained just a friend. Jang Yoon is stunned, realizing he'd misunderstood their relationship. After leaving Young, Jang Yoon goes to the stairs where Young Gil died. He sees Ju-won there and confronts him, saying he was caught on camera taking Young Gil's bag. Ju-won challenges him to find out what is inside. Jang Yoon asks if he killed Young Gil by pushing him, and if he's willing to kill for the conductor position. Ju-won, enraged, pushes Jang Yoon against the wall, saying he's the suspicious one, and walks away. Meanwhile, Young remembers something and rushes to Young Gil's bar. She asks the bartender about him. Young Gil had told the bartender to give a certain girl a package if she came looking for it. Just then Professor Kang enters, and Young says she'll come back later. Sensing something is wrong, Professor Kang follows her, offering her a ride home. He asks why she is at the bar. Young explains that it was Young Gil's favorite bar, that he worked for her aunt, and that he recently died at Shine Young. Professor Kang freezes at the mention of Young Gil's name. Young asks if he knows Young Gil. He denies it and accuses her of talking nonsense. He drops her off at her apartment, warning her to be careful what she says if she doesn't want to be involved in a murder investigation. Jang Yoon arrives, having just left Ju-won. He tells Young to go inside while he talks to Professor Kang. Jang Yoon tells Professor Kang that Ju-won took Young Gil's bag and asks if he ordered it. Professor Kang laughs, dismissing him. Jang Yoon warns him to stop messing with people and stay home, threatening to put him behind bars. Jang Yoon sends the police the video of Ju-won and Professor Kang's conversation, and Ju-won is brought in for questioning, but he refuses to cooperate. Jang Yoon questions Ju-won's assistant, asking if she saw him with anyone the day Young Gil died. Bribed with pastries, she reveals seeing a struggle on the stairs, then abruptly runs away. Jang Yoon chases her, but she's gone. She witnessed Ju-won and Young Gil arguing on the stairs and started filming. She captured Young Gil's fall, but the shock prevented her from telling Jang Yoon. Meanwhile, Young returns to the bar. As she reaches for Young Gil's gift, Professor Kang appears. Startled, she grabs the package, a record, and runs. She hides and calls Jang Yoon, but Professor Kang finds her. She runs again, but sees a teenager about to be hit by a car. She pushes the girl to safety, and a car hits her instead. A flash of light, and Yi Young's memories come flooding back. 1 year ago, she and Kim Lan were driving to Professor Song's house, followed by another car. The car speeds up and rear ends them, leading to a chase. The pursuing car crashes into Kim Lan's. Kim Lan and Yi Young are taken to the abandoned warehouse. A man in black enters, holding a knife, and cuts Yi Young free. She kicks him and picks up the dropped knife, threatening him. The man tells them to run before the others arrive. Kim Lan recognizes his voice. It's Jiyeon. They escape. As they run, Yi Young falls and a car approaches. Kim Lan pushes her out of the way, and she accidentally stabs him with the knife. Back in the present, Jang Yoon rushes Yi Young to the hospital. Her aunt sees Jang Yoon and angrily tells him to leave. Yi Young's life has been nothing but trouble since he appeared. Even her sister forbids Jang Yoon from seeing Yi Young. Distraught, Jang Yoon sits in the hospital when his phone buzzes. Ju-won's assistant has sent him the video she recorded, saying she's too cowardly to do anything with it. As Jang Yoon watches the video, Ju-won arrives. Having heard about Yi Young's accident from Professor Kang, Jang Yoon questions how he can show his face there, but Ju-won ignores him and goes into Yi Young's room. Later, they meet on the rooftop. Jang Yoon shows Ju-won the video. Ju-won smiles, congratulating him on finding proof. Jang Yoon asks if he killed Young Gil for having evidence of the accident. Ju-won claims Young Gil slipped, and he couldn't save him. Jang Yoon points out that if he couldn't save him, he should have called for help. Ju-won couldn't, as it would have disrupted his debut performance. Jang Yoon asks who was behind Kim Lan's death. Ju-won insists he doesn't know, no matter how many times Jang Yoon asks. The next day, rumors of Ju-won killing Young Gil spread through the conservatory, leading to a musician's strike. Ju-won threatens to use his authority to force them back to work. Jang Yoon confronts Ju-won again, urging him to confess before the police arrest him. Ju-won asks why he isn't going to the police with the video. Jang Yoon says he won't until Ju-won tells him about Kim Lan's death. He'll give the video to the police afterward. Ju-won asks what Jang Yoon will do, even if he finds out, as there are no witnesses or evidence. Jang Yoon says he'll take care of it himself. Ju-won continues to claim he knows nothing. Jang Yoon asks what was in Young Gil's bag. Ju-won insists it is worthless junk. But when Jang Yoon mentions the pen, Ju-won finally confesses. The pen contained evidence of Professor Kang embezzling money from Shin Young, money he used to fund Ju-won's studies abroad, enabling him to become a conductor. Jang Yoon is disgusted that Ju-won kept quiet to protect his career. He mentions that Professor Kang has been frequenting Young Gil's bar, asking what he was looking for. Jang Yoon sits in the hospital, heartbroken, when his phone rings. Ju-won's assistant sends him the video she recorded. She says she's too scared to do anything with it. Jang Yoon watches the video, which clearly shows Ju-won pushing Young Gil down the stairs. Later, Yi Young wakes up and tells Jang Yoon that Professor Kang stole Young Gil's gift, a CD that was playing in Kim Lan's car that night. Jang Yoon races to the parking garage, but the CD is broken. The next day, Yi Young asks Shinee to wheel her to see Jang Yoon. She tells him she remembers some things. A year ago, she found the pen she later gave to Young Gil in the waiting room, and then gave it to Kim Lan. Kim Lan thought it belonged to Professor Song, and told her to give it to him so he could return it. Then Kim Lan saw Jang Yoon, and asked Yi Young to get him some water while he talked to his brother. He gave Jang Yoon his jacket to put in the car. Young also remembers Ju-won being at the warehouse, but he seemed to be helping them, not harming them. Jang Yoon says even if Ju-won didn't kill Kim Lan, he still took a life and showed her the video of Ju-won with Young Gil. That night, Yi Young calls Ju-won, thanking him for saving them and begging him to help find Kim Lan's killer. The next day, Ju-won visits Yoon-ju, telling her what happened that night. As she's the only one who might believe him, he suspects who killed Kim Lan and gives Yoon-ju a key, telling her to give it to Jang Yoon if anything happens to him. Ju-won goes to the police and confesses to killing Young Gil. Yoon-ju gives Jang Yoon the key, which he uses to retrieve Young Gil's bag. Inside, he finds a pen and a memory card. He connects the card to his computer. It's from a dash cam. The footage shows Kim Lan, after being stabbed, telling Yi Young to run for help. Professor Kang's car hit them. He tells Young Gil to follow Yi Young. After they leave, Professor Kang gets out of his car and attacks Kim Lan. It was Professor Kang who delivered the fatal blow. Enraged, Jang Yoon drives recklessly to confront Professor Kang, nearly running him over. The professor still denies being the killer. Jang Yoon shows him the dashcam footage. Professor Kang tries to grab the phone, but Jang Yoon punches him, breaking his nose. He's furious that the professor took a life to cover up his embezzlement. He tells Jiyeon, who reveals she remembers Professor Kang being in the car that night and will testify. Professor Kang is arrested at the airport as he tries to flee the country. He overhears Young's testimony and blurts out that she couldn't have seen him in the pouring rain that night. The police laugh and take him away. Young is released. As Kim Lan's family doesn't press charges against her, Shin Young collapses. Jang Yoon's father finds a new conservatory in Kim Lan's memory. Young's sister gives her the diary she had with her during the accident. Young reads it and realizes she is in love with Jang Yoon, having had a crush on him since he was her teaching assistant in college. She rushes to his apartment, but he's gone, leaving a letter. He left, afraid of causing her more pain. Young runs out with the letter, searching for him, but he's already gone. A year later, the Shin Young musicians are now working at the Kim Lan Conservatory. Jang Yoon returns for the conservatory's first anniversary celebration as the featured pianist. Ju Won, released from prison, is invited to conduct but declines, now leading a small orchestra. Jang Yoon pursues Yi Young relentlessly, just as he did before. Finally, she forgives him, and they reunite, ready to face the future together. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think of this incredible story in the comments below. See you in the next video.